Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Matthew Iovanni. He's a partner at Full Funnel, and we are going to talk about why it does or does not make sense to outsource your SDR team. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Super happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you on. In some walks of life, we're competitors. In others, we've collaborated before. I like the way you see the world. I have some differing opinions, and so I think this is going to be a really interesting episode where we get to kind of, share different perspectives. So if you're listening and you're wondering what the hell is this episode going to be about, I think, Matt, your hypothesis is that, people shouldn't outsource their SDR function. My hypothesis is that they should. There's a time and a place. There's a time and a place where it makes more sense. There's a time and a place when it doesn't. We're going to kind of not battle it out, but we'll share conflicting opinions, and I think it'll be at the end of the day an interesting conversation. So I want to open with you. Why do you think people shouldn't open or outsource their SDR function?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. For me, it's not so much that they shouldn't outsource it. It's how you use the tool and whether you indefinitely outsource that function of your business. And I think it's really challenging for a lot of companies to outsource indefinitely this very core function, which is connected to product market fit. It's been my experience that when folks look at outsourcing this outbound motion or that sort of SDR motion, they sort of tend to fall into two camps. There are folks that really know exactly how to sell their product. They have got product market fit nailed. Like Google, as an example, does outsource a fair amount of that sort of outbound motion. Microsoft outsources this. Like, these companies outsource that motion, but they have this thing dialed to the nines. They know what they're selling, who they're selling it to, there's good product market fit, so on and so forth. In those instances, organizations trying to outsource that function, it makes a lot of sense for them. They're not trying to add a lot of critical infrastructure. They're big, they're bureaucratic. Them doing anything is like clunky, and it makes sense for them to find like a real value add partner to help them with that distribution. Where I find the big problem with outsourced SDRs is, and Full Funnel doesn't just do outsourced SDR work. We started doing it in 2020, mainly because I was just fascinated how many people were doing it. It took off like a rocket ship. We ended up having a very large staffing business as a result. And for me, the thing I observed is a lot of organizations that were coming in were very small. They were organizations that were like between Series A, Series B, or not even venture funded or anything to that effect. They didn't have product market fit, and they really didn't understand what the market wanted. They just wanted demand. And I think that that's the sort of point where I look at this and I'm like, you guys probably shouldn't be outsourcing this soup to nuts to some other company to figure it out on your behalf. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the way I like to think about it is there's the strategy element of who we're going after and why. And you can put product market fit in there, because if you don't have product market fit, or if you can't communicate what your product market fit is, then you don't have it. If you can't say concisely that it's this set of accounts, this set of prospects, this is the pain that we solve. If you reach out to them, they are likely to, be interested and want to solve that problem, right? Like, in my opinion, I think SDRs don't create demand, they find demand, right? And we have to tell them where to go looking. And so there's that strategy element of it, which is like, hey, where do you go to find demand? Then with outsourcing, you also get the management layer of managing the SDRs and managing the tech stack and making sure that people are hitting their goals on time. And then you get the labor of people making the calls, sending the emails, et cetera, et cetera. There's those kind of three elements that I'd kind of try and break it down to. And I totally agree. My experience has been the same, that many, especially when we're dealing with newer startups, they're using outbound as a way of validating a market or validating a hypothesis, even if they don't realize that's what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, and part of the challenge that I think organizations are running into now is like this idea of what is this SDR function supposed to do? And at some level, I try to break it down to like you're paying for distribution, like a demand gen program. You have peer-to-peer channels like your word of mouth, networking, referrals, events, trade shows, partners, things like that. Then you have earned media, so organic traffic or organic social, things of that nature. You have paid advertising, search, social, programmatic, directory, display, etc. Then you end up with outbound. And outbound is email, phone, social, occasionally text. But really what you're doing is you're using people and this activity as a distribution medium to take a value narrative, put it in front of someone who is not expecting to be contacted, and trying to elicit a favorable response or generate interest. And so if you start thinking of the failure points there, and this is where I think outsource SDR companies actually add a ton of value, is like most businesses struggle with the operationalizing of that function, right? How to recruit, hire, train, build redundancy, ramp, how to do the training and professional development. But the reality is that a lot of these interactions, like if you're doing outsourced SDRs the right way, which is that it's fully transparent with the client, you're usually working inside of their infrastructure, or they have full visibility into your infrastructure. You're starting to really focus on what happens at the interaction between the message you're distributing and the prospect that is absorbing it. And it's like if you tell 10 people that you theoretically are selling to something and they're not interested, that's a data point. You tell that to 100 people and they're not interested, that's a trend and you got a problem. And I think that most organizations don't look at it like that. They're sort of like pass fail. You guys either know what you're doing, you're going to get us meetings and everything's going to be gravy, or conversely, you guys are terrible, you don't know what you're doing because no one is interested in my product. That is a really inefficient way of using organizations that, in my experience, whether it's predictable revenue or full funnel or junk crew or revenue or any of these companies, most of these companies are incredibly proficient operationally at getting this motion going.
Totally. It's not just about the operational, it's the strategy. And it does kind of feel like with a client, it's the roll of the dice of like, what is the first market that they get us to go after? We put so much effort and work into our market fit, like onboarding program to help kind of dissect. And really it's to help get the client out of their own way and be like, just give us who is the most likely to respond right now, and not like, let's test out an obscure market that you want to start with. Because my least favorite engagement is when somebody comes in and says, hey, we want to test out a new market. And then 4 months later, they're like, yeah, we're going to fire you because we didn't get any meetings. They're like, well, yeah, test out a new market. Like, we did the thing. They're like, yeah, but we didn't get any revenue from it. And it's like, but you've never gotten any revenue from it. I had a client where we did exactly this. We spent 6 months. We booked them like 60 something meetings. And at the end of the engagement, I was grilling the AE because I knew the CEO was grilling the AE, like what went wrong. And he finally blurted out after 30 minutes of me like hammering him. He's like, oh, we've never actually closed a meeting, or we've never closed a deal in this vertical before. The founder just wanted to explore this. And I was like, I'm going to punch you.
Well, and you're getting to this sort of like one of the realities of that particular business. And again, like we do a number of things at Full Funnel. This is one of the things that we do. And this particular service line is one of the most fascinating because of the way that people intersect with it. Like when we're doing like a HubSpot engineering project or a Salesforce engineering project or like a digital advertising campaign, it's so linear. And then when you get into this, it's like organizations are expecting to pay nothing because they like the US market broadly does not appreciate demand generation. And they furthermore really don't appreciate that SDR function or the outbound motion. It is looked at as the janitorial work of sales and marketing. And what's fascinating is like, I, personally take about 50 calls a week, like discovery calls. And I'm always interacting with people who say the same thing. They're always like, Matt, the real thing is that if you put me in front of like someone who has a problem, like we close them all the time. We're so good at that. Like I pretty much wake up in the morning, I piss excellence. I'm so good at closing deals. We just don't have enough at bats. And you're sort of looking at this company and you're like, okay, everyone says that. I joke with people now. I'm like, yeah, that's like literally the record that's playing in all of these calls. So many organizations don't have the appropriate amount of demand to satisfy the pipeline machine that they've built with their AEs and everything else associated. But yet they don't pay folks in the demand gen function, nor do they even set up the sort of construct of that function's jobs to be interesting. It's all built to be sort of very janitorial, like low-end work. And I think what you're probably seeing, and I'm certainly observing this, is like this market shift is really moving that role into something where people are like, okay, this SDR model may not actually be the way it should be in the future. And like, what does that look like? And that's where I think it gets exciting. But like the underlying problem is still that organizations look at this as a pass-fail exercise. And, you know, they pretty much like throw it away if it doesn't work. And there's always this underlying question, which is why didn't it work? For you guys to generate 60 meetings with the intended ICP and none of those meetings, get to the outcome, you're not responsible for the outcome. You're responsible for the interaction between that company and their ICP. So your demand function was exceptionally well executed. The pipeline management function couldn't close.
100%. I mean, I think what people actually buy when they're buying outsourcing is you're buying a combination of the strategy, the management, and the labor. But the way people see what they are buying is they just see, oh, I'm buying an SDR. Yeah. I'm renting an SDR. And any SDR worth their salt, you guys are the experts here. You know, any SDR worth their salt should be able to go and book meetings because I can book meetings for myself and I've got a 40% close rate. But when you people, and I think there's a couple of things. Is one, people don't want to pay for the strategy work that they need. And that's one of the biggest pieces is they don't understand that there's you got to give people direction. You have to tell people this is how you build those accounts, that if I book 60 meetings for you, you're going to fucking close some of them, you know? And the second piece is when somebody says, oh, I piss excellence. I've got a 40% close rate. All I need is more meetings on my calendar. The thing that I struggle with is a lot of these AEs don't understand what it's like to take a real cold outbound meeting.
Yes.
We help a lot of companies with adding their first growth channel, beyond founder network, word of mouth, referral, a little bit of inbound. And there's a dramatic difference between somebody who's in your founder's network who is basically ready to buy. There's the social proof. There's everything. There's a relationship. There's trust. Then you go outside and into the cold. And as a salesperson, you really got to work for these deals. And I find a lot of AEs that I coach or work with or encounter, they're not prepared. And they're like, oh, these meetings suck. You're like, well, yeah, of course they do compared to your boss's buddy who they go back, 20 years. Of course it's going to be harder.
I always try to think about this. For me, it's really, it is amusing, especially, and I'm sure you're here too, because we've both been doing this a very long time. And for me, this has been a decade of doing this. So, before I did this, I was a salesperson. I was a business development person. I did all of these roles. And one of the things that's really interesting is we have, as a sort of business community, especially in B2B software and some of these other sort of verticals, we've gotten ourselves into this problem because the way that most organizations are going to run their sort of professional development food chain is you come in as an SDR, and then if you're really good and proficient, we want to move you out of that role as soon as humanly possible into the coveted role of being an account executive. When the velvet ropes part, you get your Patagonia vest, and then you get to stop doing all this terrible stuff that you have to do when you're a janitor. The problem is that what companies are doing is essentially just loading up that pipeline management layer with people who are underutilized, and they've really never had to go to battle. To your point, they've gotten leads that are so warm or so easy that they're order taking. It's an administrative function. When someone says I close at a 50% rate, I almost always think that you're full of shit. And the reason is because I don't close at a 50% rate. But I primarily deal with cold prospects, people who come in to our organization through word of mouth or advertising or outbound or whatever it might be. And I got to convince them that we are a good fit through what is effectively consultative selling. So if I'm not doing that, I'm going to have a hard time believing that you're doing that as like a product engineering background or something at a company. It just doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the problem again goes back to like no one appreciates this function. And the cool thing that's going on, and you and I have talked about this like offline, which is like there's so much technology and engineering that is being put into the demand gen world now. And so it's no longer just like pick up a phone and start dialing. Like there's a lot to this. And what I'm hoping ends up happening is that demand gen programs start to get their own budget, because I think that's a huge issue. The fact that SDRs are owned by sales, which are usually just glorified pipeline management people, or marketing that's more concerned about like MQLs or whatever like impression share they get. You know, demand gen should take money, especially in a B2B context, and convert it into discovery calls with their ICP. And outbound, that motion is a huge part of it. But I think if we start like treating demand gen as its own department with its own fundamental KPIs, you're going to see that department organically move away from super entry-level people that only want to be in that role for 6 to 12 months. Then they want to get into something else. And that's also, by the way, why you have such shitty AEs, right? The reality is if every SDR has to become an AE, that means that you're taking a bunch of people who could have been good at demand gen and making them shitty AEs if they're not also good at the whole account executive or the sort of deal management side of this. And it is true, you can have an amazing person who's incredibly good at outbound prospecting or doing inbound lead management that just isn't the best person in an AE role. But we don't allow that person to flourish in those types of engagements. We like shovel them through to the next, level of the video game, which is that sort of prestigious Patagonia vest that everyone seems to want.
Totally. Well, not only does sales development not have a seat at the table when it comes to strategy, but you're totally right. There's no guru track, in sales development. There's no tenured SDR. It's if you want a promotion, maybe there's a leveling system, but there's no like, okay, I'm going to be just the absolute best, murderer of an SDR, and I'm just going to book, 3x the meetings everybody else is going to do. Like there's not that role. There's not the compensation plan. It's either you want to go to SDR manager or you go to AE, and it puts this there's like a structural lack of SDR experience because it's fundamentally a transient role in the way that it exists right now.
I mean, the only reason that your organization, mine, the rest of our colleagues that do this type of work, which is a massive amount of companies, mind you. When I started Full Funnel, there was like 5 or 6 companies that did this. Now there are hundreds and hundreds of people that do this. And the reason why this is such a big business is because most organizations are dreadful at running demand gen functions. They're just not good at it. And so it's like kind of staring you right in the face, which is like, for me, there is no global win here. Like there's like the universe that predictable revenue, Full Funnel, all the operatics, like all those guys, and they're great companies that do this type of work. Like the universe is infinite. Like we don't even bump into each other that much. The reality is that the sort of market itself can make a shift so that they become less reliant on sort of like flash in the pan fixes or this sort of transitory, I tried this person, I tried that person. It is 6th grade math. And I think that if you get people to appreciate demand gen as a department, a lot of these problems are solved, and it will also solve what you have experienced, which I've experienced, which is the throwaway demand gen person. It's like you hire Collin and predictable revenue to do this amazing job standing up this motion. They get all this momentum. And then for whatever reason, it doesn't consummate at the end because it was, as an example, like a trial thing for a new market. And then they just discard it like it's not interesting to apply to some other problem that they have. And so to me, like a demand gen person would be like, wow, every time I give Collin X amount of money, I get Y outcome. And it's like, that is such an efficient use of capital. I need to keep using Collin and his group to do this function. the problem I think usually is the people that we're interacting with aren't really those people. They don't understand what the function. It's all pass fail. And it's just a very inefficient way of trying to deploy capital for, net new customer acquisition.
Yeah. You pay for the worst months, the first months are the worst months. The first 4 months of an SDR program is going to be statistically, obviously, your worst 4 months. You're doing the hard part of building a new program. And this is the frustrating part for me is like you say a customer, you're selling something that's like 30, 50 to 100K. Your sales cycle on a deal like that is like 4 to 8 weeks kind of range. So in a 4-month engagement, people are looking for, okay, did we close a deal? Maybe even in 6 months, did we close a deal in the first 6 months? Right. It's like, well, we're like 2 sales cycles in, like how can you expect to close a deal that quickly? Like, do your deals close that quickly if they're inbound? And with outbound, they're going to take longer because you're reaching people
right
in all
no urgency.
phases. Yeah. And so there might be problem aware. They might not be problem aware. They might have, and like, if you're lucky, you might come across somebody who is aware of the problem and has decided to do something about it. If you're lucky.
Yeah. I mean, well, look at it like this. I mean, a lot of folks, and just kind of building off of that, like a lot of folks are like, well, what's my ROI going to be on this program? And for me, I'm always like, well, what kind of ROI are you looking for? Right? Because like there is a reality too that question is illogical, right? If you're a VC funded startup and you're looking to acquire net new logos for 200% of ACV, it's going to be a lot different than a pro serve firm looking to acquire clients at like 10% of total revenue, right? And so there is this narrative that like an ROI is based on your financial framework of reasonable returns, which is vastly different depending on what kind of company you are, what you're trying to do, where you are in the market cycle. The thing that I always try to look at is like, look, I am of the opinion that you should be able to close 1 out of 5 BANT qualified or whatever qualifications there that you want to use deals. I still maintain that BANT's the best one. Come at me, Medic and MedPick. But like the reality is like, I'm a very simple guy. And so for me, if you have 5 BANT qualified ops and you can close 1 of them, good. You're like cooking with gas. So for me, if like you need to get like a 3-to-1 return on invested capital on your total program, then you have to be like, okay, well, 3-to-1 return and I close at a 20% rate. So I'm going to need a 15x per dollar invested on pipeline. And so the way that I would look at the health of the program is predicated on pipeline growth, not on return on investment. And to your point, that completely eradicates the whole aspect of like, I have a 6-month sales cycle. I'm 3 months in. Where's my money? Because you're looking at the right metric. It also solves the problem where you sort of have all this pipeline that then doesn't close. Because it's like the issue isn't the pipeline rate, it's the close rate. If you're only closing 5% of deals, and you want a 3-to-1, well, guess what? It's not a 15x on pipeline. You're going to need like a very substantial amount of pipeline. And so I just find that like, what's weird about this market after doing this for 10 years is like, you kind of look at people and you're like, all right, you're a smart guy. You're a CEO, CFO, CRO, but you're saying things that make no sense. And if you break it on a chalkboard, you can't even make it make sense. But the reality is they'll just look at you dead in the eye and they're just like, make my problem go away. And I get that. I don't fault them for that. It's just that, I really want to win the lottery. Like, it would be great. Like, I really would love to get $1 billion check right now. I'd take half of it, let the other half go, and I'd be done. Unfortunately, I have to work every day because I got to feed myself. And so, you can play that game all you want, but eventually it is going to come back to like, you got to put the work in. You actually have to have like a, financially productive exercise. And so to tie it back where I think that, the SDR function should live is that I honestly believe that most of these SDR outsourcing organizations do a bang up job for the most part. There's some that certainly don't, but like all the good ones, they do a great job operationalizing this stuff. But the reality is they cannot fix a lack of product market fit or executive understanding of that motion. You can't do that. And for me, like maybe at 5 clients, you could do that. At 25, getting harder. 50 way hard. At 100,
It's impossible.
it's impossible.
Yeah.
So I really feel like the way that people should utilize these types of organizations and how I espouse people should use ours is like, let us set this function up. Like, let's get it rolling for you, but you got to own this function because you got to take accountability that this is your problem, which is always that product market fit, like market absorption problem. I don't disagree with you. The strategy layer of like how we can help clients rationalize this is critically important. But I don't think that this sort of like indefinite outsourced team makes sense. I just don't. I haven't seen it work.
I've seen it work in a couple instances, but there's a narrow band. You know, it's the team that's big enough to need and afford an outsourced provider, and is happy with their current level of pipeline. You know, because let's break down like what it takes to build a great SDR function. You need somebody to own the strategy. You need somebody to own the tech stack. You need somebody to own the SDRs, and that's training, onboarding, hiring, recruiting, keeping that wheel going. Then you need a great SDR. If you only have one SDR, this is a lot of overhead for just one SDR. If your company only wants one or two SDRs, the amount of work you have to put in to make one or two SDRs really great, it's almost, I think you can prove out in the math that it's a better option to outsource. At the same time, I believe that an internal SDR is always going to beat an external SDR. I don't care how good the shop is. You know, we're all good SDRs. We're all good at training SDRs on how to cold call, how to cold email. I think the number one thing that makes you a great SDR is understanding of the problem space, understanding of the market, understanding of the customer. And that translates into how you cold call and what you say on cold calls and your level of understanding. It's like, Can I speak the language or not? And I would be I'd probably be a decent cold caller now. If I had to cold call in French, I would produce zeros. Even if I spent a whole year at it, I probably wouldn't be able to book a meeting. I speak a tiny bit of French, only because I'm Canadian and the school system forced me to do so. But like, it's that level of like, you know, I speak the language, I don't speak the language. And my level of comprehension en français is absolutely terrible. And so, you know, I'm not saying that it's the exact equivalent. You know, I think there are strengths of being with an SDR, with an outsourced SDR firm. You're going to have stronger cold calling skills and cold emailing skills. But I do think the one thing that makes great SDRs great is that level of understanding of the customer, the prospect, the market space. And you just don't get that if you're, if the client, if it's an outsourced relationship. I haven't seen too many clients that say, hey, you know what, we want to onboard your SDR. We're going to take a whole week and put them through our onboarding. We're going to spend 3 months and teach them what it is to be an employee here at this company. Like, nobody does that. They say, hey, we want in 4 months, this SDR who has just met us today has to produce enough meetings for us to be profitable in a 4 or 6 month period. And you're like, would you do that with your SDR? Oh, yeah, sure we would. And it's like, yeah, but didn't you spend 3 months onboarding them? You know? Yeah. Didn't you have like your VP and all these people?
Well, that's part of the make my problem go away, right? It's like you know, again, I get it, like that utopian vision of like, you know, that makes it sound like a great place. If anyone figures it out, like, let me know. But, you know, even in that use case, like, I feel like for us, like, I have a client who, this is the situation, right? Like, we have been working with them for about 5 months. There's a 2-person SDR function. To your point, they don't have the infrastructure to spin it up. They don't have the overhead associated to spin it up. So we spun it up for them, and it's going great. Fantastic. Now I'm looking at them being like, okay, take them in-house. Let's do this. Get them in-house. Because for me, the problem that exists right at this very moment, once it's like productive, is like, where does this go from here? Because to your point, like, we cannot facilitate the same level of intersection, interoperability, whatever that might be, with you being in-house. The other thing is you're paying a premium for us to be managing this labor. And once people are productive, they're hitting their goals and objectives, it's kind of like mission accomplished. From that point forward, usually people are trying to scale it or do something else around that, where I think organizations like ours like offer a lot of value. I think what ends up getting missed in this like SDR conversation, I think like for any of those companies, especially like you and I have been doing this for a very long time. So I meet people who've been doing this for like less than 3 years, doing like outsourced staffing or something. I'm always like, listen, like, let me try to help you with this, which is that it doesn't work if you try to just keep like your clients albatrossed with your labor. It does not work. It's bad for the rep. It's bad for the client. It's actually bad for you. You just don't realize it yet. And because of all of that, like that model needs to shift. And one of the things back when I met you originally, like we had some really cool conversations and I left being like, wow, this guy actually like doesn't look at this as just like a body shop organization. He looks at it like there's a lot going on here that I want to engineer. The best thing that our sort of market can do is sort of like what is effectively outsourced sales providers in some sense is start moving towards like demand engineering. Like stop thinking about it as a body shop or a one person or per head basis. Like that is a thing. But the way that we add durable value in the market, what I believe is that I have gone through probably like just since 2020, probably like 1,500 SDRs that I've like had on staff and what have you. Like I meet VPs of sales like, well, I just completed a Series A and I've had 30 people work on me. I'm like, I've had 1,500 of these people, right? You learn stuff. And the reality is that like what I've learned is that like this collective of who we are, this type of organization, like we're really good at getting this up and running. And to your point, if you don't have like the need for 2 SDRs, you're not going to put all this infrastructure in place. But we're not a substitute for you, the company, figuring out how to flip and sell your product. We're just not.
Yes.
Even like winning by design that has nothing to do with this, or SBI growth, like they don't do that. They give you some guardrails on what to do, but like at some point, you, the company, you, the CEO, like you need to be able to sell your product. We can help you operationalize it. We can minimize risk during it. But like we're not a panacea to take crappy products into the market.
Totally. You and I have, I mean, you're on the podcast because I respect you and I've seen the work you guys do and you do good work. If you point either of our teams at, you're selling, I don't know, any sort of SaaS software and you point us at farmers in Nebraska, I don't care how good you are with the tool set. If that's not your best target market, we're not gonna produce anything.
Clay doesn't work with that? Like, is that, you can't use ChatGPT?
I say this, I have had a few clients that target the ag industry, and so it does work. I think email works shockingly well targeting farmers. I was like, no, it's not gonna, it'll have to be phone. I just, I imagine like Farmer Bill on his tractor.
Right.
Where I'm like, yeah, no, there's no way. They're very, very tech savvy. So it's maybe not a great example. But yeah.
Well, here's something I'll just like give the listeners on this, because I still participate very significantly in our business. And during COVID, we had this client that came in. They were like a classic venture funded. It was a bio company. They were just like, the guy was like, literally thought he was like the second coming of Elon Musk. And this guy, started like trying to sell this thing that made no sense whatsoever. But he had this like little side business, which is like a lab function. And COVID hits, they start doing COVID testing. And they're like, can you guys please sell this? And I was like, who am I going to put on this thing? Because I'm like, I don't even know what this thing is. And so I took it. And I start doing sort of these pitches, and I start like for the client, and I just start doing it. We sold $40 million of COVID testing, and we did it in like 4 months, right? The reality though is like, I keep going back. I was like, we're selling COVID testing in a pandemic. It was literally like selling, and we were selling it to movie studios that needed to do COVID testing because of the SAG guidelines. So it was like literally selling insulin to diabetics. And we sold an incredible amount of this stuff. And it wasn't because I am insanely good at sales. It was because I was selling a product the market desperately wanted, and we created a frictionless way for them to get it. Right?
Yeah, you're not a great marksman in this example. You're shooting fish in a barrel with a cannon.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah.
And so many of these people that I talk to, they're like, oh, I used to work at Facebook. I sort of like, okay, so you worked at one of the best product companies on planet Earth. And because they did so well, you're of the opinion that you really know what you're doing in sales. It's like, yeah.
You were the golden rep of an amazing territory.
Yeah.
Hootsuite's the local example here, and I brought it up on the show before, but I know people that have been on amazing people on both sides of Hootsuite. And there are some that are the mythical $1 million rep, and there are others that are, just doing okay. And the core difference in their ability is the market that they serve.
Yeah, 1,000%.
Somebody said, oh, you know what, you get this market, and that's the best market for Hootsuite. Yeah. And suddenly this person's $1 million rep.
Yeah. And I don't want to piss off any of the OpenAI people, but I will tell you that like selling OpenAI right now, probably not that difficult. Probably difficult to get that meeting, guys. So like, in, I think it was 2014, 2015, there was a black car company that had raised a whole bunch of money. They were fairly well known. And they're like, hey, we want to get in touch with every restaurant in the United States. Do you think you could do that for us? We want to launch this thing that we're going to do in all 50 states. And I was like, yeah, for sure. And I gave them Krista. And Krista was booking, she had like 5 clients or 6 clients. She was booking 10 meetings a month for these 6 clients. I was like, it's okay, we'll find somebody else. Krista, you get the black car company. So Krista went from booking an average of 60 meetings a month, which is pretty freaking good. Pretty good.
To, in month 1 with black car company, 327 meetings.
Yeah.
Was Krista suddenly 6x better, 5x better?
Oh my God. And that's like the thing that no one understands. I know. Yeah, they're like these amazing people, and it's just like proficient. If you have to get a salesperson that is literally like the Albert Einstein of sales to sell your stuff sucks. That's the reality. Like that's it, So it's fascinating to me when we think about this SDR motion, because like, let's just like boil it down, right? SDRs are in fact distribution means to take your message to an audience that's not intending to receive it and to generate interest from it, right? Mm-hmm. They need to do the activity. They need to show up. They need to qualitatively distribute that message in a highly credible way. After that, it's all about the feedback loop. It's about massaging it, but like, that's not their problem. That's like the pizza delivery guy being blamed for the pizza tasting terribly. Mm-hmm. They just delivered the pizza. That's what they did. It's so crazy that we've put so much overemphasis on that role when it's usually a systemic problem with the organization.
100%. I mean, most of our scripts are generated around, hey, I want to introduce this product to you. I want to see if it's a fit. I want to see if it's something that's on your mind. I want to see if this is something that's relevant to you right now. These scripts are not manufacturing demand out of midair. They're not taking somebody who has zero pain whatsoever and they are suddenly like, oh my God, I can't believe this SDR called me. Now suddenly I am in pain and whatever. SDRs are finding the pain. We engineer the cold call outreach and the cold email outreach to quickly help people that are in pain quickly identify that, hey, this might be a problem or a solution to my problem. If you don't tell your SDR function or your demand gen function where to go look for this pain, like they're not gonna be able to deliver anything.
The market for SDRs are also like killing this whole thing, right? I can't tell you the amount of people that I'll talk to that be like, well, how many dials an hour do you guys make? And it's like, what do you mean? Well, how many dials an hour do you make? I'm like, that's a stupid question, right? Like the reality is if you have a 1% connect rate, you're going to make a lot of dials. If you got a 20% connect rate, like a 2.5 minute average talk time, you're going to make a lot less dials. You're using manual dialing on a rotary phone. Are you quick calling through a Sales Pro or a Sales Loft? Do you use Orem or Salesfinity? Are you using a Connect and Sell? Like it is not a linear thing. And like, I don't know why this particular function in sales, people try to commoditize down to like numbers, but it's like, it's lunacy. It's always been when you're paying someone, especially on phone, to do this work, you're paying for them to interact with a prospect. I am more concerned with talk time. What is the total amount of time that you are talking to prospects and how many of them were you talking to? And then I want to know qualitatively through recordings and otherwise what happened in those interactions. It's mental that we start being like, well, these other companies, they do 40 dials an hour. It's like, who cares?
Yeah. I 100% agree. It's not about the dials per hour. It's not about the calls. Because, I mean, with tools like Orem and Connect and Sell, I could dial 1,000 calls an hour. They're not going to be super high quality. You're going to get a ton of hangups. So it's not about the metrics. It's about the output. It's about the results. The thing that I think a lot of people, they mistake is they build their math of like, is this going to be ROI positive off of like a proof of concept or like early proof of concept numbers. The way I look at like an engagement of like going from 0 to 1, and I'd love your thoughts on this, with the new SDR team, or whether you're outsourcing it or insourcing it, there's this like prove it stage. Prove that I can get something interesting. I don't fucking care what the metrics say. Just prove that I can get something interesting. I want to see, I'm going to turn the batteries on. I'm going to see if this car like turns over, right? Can I get it to turn over? I'm not going racing yet. I just want the engine to turn over. Great. That takes 4 to 6 months. If I get something interesting, and that should be like meetings, obviously, probably some pipeline, maybe a closed deal. But if I can get something interesting to happen, I'm leaving the like prove it stage, prove that it works, prove that it's alive. I'm moving to the optimize stage. And then that's where you're spending all this time. Okay, how do we make this better? We've got something that works. What are the things that we need to do to operationalize to make it better? And then once you get through there, you scale it. It's like, cool, we've hit this. Now we're going to double down until we start to see diminishing returns. I think shops are really great for the first 2 phases. And to your point, you're not going to be able to hit you'll be able to hit a better level of scale internally than you will with an external rep or with an external service, because you have to pay my markup on all the things. So you'll be, X% more expensive than everybody else.
They're also misaligned incentives, right? So I will just to hit that last point, like the way that most SDRs as service companies make money is based on the person being billed out. And so whether that's fractionally or holistically, FTEs or partially, you're incentivized as an SDR company to keep those people working and billing. Any sort of deterioration of that is bad. To your point, like the way that the market should shift, and in fairness, like most of the really good players in this space already have this product distinction, is that you do have the like sort of test sort of product, which is like test this motion, make sure it works. Then you have like a scale this motion, where you start to like put fully dedicated people on it. You start going through that motion. And then you have this, like you either take it internally or you scale to a point where it's not just like a price per head, because you can't, people ask me all the time, like, well, what happens? Like, is there a price break at, 5 or 10 people? I'm like, oh no, it actually goes up. Of course it goes up. What are you kidding me? Like you have 1 dog that you're walking. It's not a big deal. 2 dogs you're walking. Not a big deal. 15 dogs you're walking. Oh, now it's starting to become a big deal. 30, 40, 50. Like there's infrastructure required as these things expand. And so what I've found and why I really like the idea of getting this in their company, clients' companies, because it starts showing them the actual requirement to manage this type of function. It gives them perspective on it. Bigger organizations like your Adobes, your Microsoft, like they will pay companies like ours plenty of money to set up that infrastructure and not be concerned about it. The issue is when like the smaller companies that we start getting it moving, they're like, great, let's move to 10 or 15 reps. It's like, okay, let's talk about how that works. And they're like, wait a minute, wouldn't the price go down? Like, no, what are you, crazy? Like it just doesn't make sense. But again, it's them looking at this as a completely transitory, transactional thing that's like easy, like it's a call center. It's not
an external thing I don't have to think about. And like, if you're going to be spending that amount of money, I think it's crazy to want to have 10 or 20 or 30 outsource reps. Like at that scale, you can, once you hit 7, even at 4 or 5 reps, if you're a company that has the budget for 4 or 5 outsource reps, you absolutely have the budget to bring this internally and get a pretty good ROI on, the right people you need to build that team.
And then you move into this next problem category, which is, okay, now you have this team of 5 to 10 people. How do you support that team? And is that team just something that you put in and then that's the end of it? Because my observation, how our company is built around this concept is like, okay, you take those people internally, let's say, but now you got like data ops, you got like the technology management support, you got all the administrative and strategy functions, reporting and forecasting, like all this stuff that now has to happen You're not going to have those people do that. And even if you go ahead and hire an SDR manager, you show me an SDR manager who knows how to do all of that stuff. And again, I will outbid you for that person because that person is incredibly valuable. They don't exist, So we're getting to this point of complexity. Yeah, I know. It's like someone like the jobs. Right. And it's crazy to think that you're going to get someone to do that. And so this is where I think there's a huge opportunity for the market and what is effectively this cohort of companies that involve us and you and a whole bunch of our peers, which is like, okay, how do we like move this thing forward together? Because like just the sort of, let me read the tea leaves for you. The companies are not going to figure out how to do this themselves. This thing's changing way too quick for that to happen. There'll always be 10% of companies that have great products that just sell. And I do consulting in a lot of these companies, and I'll walk into some of the hottest products that are going on, and I'm like, whoa, this is a shit show. It's just that like the stuff's flying off the shelf. They don't have to be efficient because it's such a good product. So like, this is a time when I think all of the folks that offer these services, it's a cool opportunity to start moving this in a direction that I think is more like aligned with where the market's going to go. And the only way to do that is by educating, I think, like what is effectively this net new class of CMO, CRO. And I think they're feeling that because I talk to these folks, and I'm sure you do as well, where they're like, yeah, I'm struggling. There's too much tech here. The best is like the VP of sales who just took over a program. They're like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. Like this HubSpot is here. I use Salesforce. This thing doesn't even work. Like how to use this? What is Apollo? Like, what is that? There's that problem is pretty pervasive right now.
Well, and then you get into like, oh, and you want to do any of the cool stuff with AI, you got to use Clay. And people are like, oh, let me see Clay. And they're like, oh, cool. It looks like a database. And you're like, well, kind of. Like it is, but that's like the Crayola crayon version of what Clay is. Right. It can be the most magnificent fountain pen, but there's a lot of skill that goes into writing with a fountain pen that I do not possess, but I can write with crayons. Yeah,
Clay is like a fascinating thing. I mean, I think Clay is like the big leverage point for where this is going. And like, I know those guys, I don't. That platform and product, as I look at it, I'm like, this is great. This is super cool. And it finally is like where demand is going, which is it's demand engineering. It's not just like repetitive motion of dialing or what have you. The cool thing about where that is heading, though, is like, to your point, you can't just hire a 24-year-old kid and be like, here's Clay, good luck. That just is not how it's going to work. You also can't give Clay to like the 50-year-old person who worked at Oracle for 20 years and did things one way, and like that's not going to work. So the space now for like demand engineering, I think is huge. And I think that those platforms, let's face it, like whether it's like HubSpot or SalesLoft, they're all coming for that. Like it's going to be like the Clay thing versus like these other things. And, I feel like it's going to be a really cool next couple of years, but there is this reality that we're now moving away from the sort of archaic SDR model. And it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. And I think that the organizations like, yours, like mine, like these other companies are going to have to adapt. And it's going to be fascinating to see which ones do and which ones try to retain that like 2020 model, which, I mean, I've seen people that are still like, they're not going out of business now. There's people actually going out of business doing this because that model doesn't work anymore.
And they're going down with the sink and ship and they're saying, oh, SDR doesn't work.
Yeah.
I had a conversation just before this call with somebody who's like, yeah, cold email doesn't work. And I was like, oh, interesting. Tell me what you did. They're like, oh, we sent, thousands and this and that. I went into MX Toolbox and I did a lookup. I was like, you don't have a DKIM record set up and you've got a 308 redirect as a domain. I was like, these are two things that are going to absolutely murder your email deliverability. So your email campaigns weren't even a fair test because you probably didn't even send it because so much of this was probably just quarantine or spam or lost. And so to your point, like the old model doesn't work. Table stakes, as sales development still works, cold calling still works, cold email still works, but the table stakes have risen. And if you're not doing things like Orem or using things like Clay, it's a lot harder just to like hit just like the bare minimum, and I think a lot of companies missed out on that and they didn't have the technical capabilities. And it's much easier to say, oh, sales development doesn't work than it is to admit that I didn't have the skills or the ability to figure out how to make it work with this next coming of,
Well, and let's even just talk about labor for 2 seconds, because I think this would be like really, I mean, you and I have both globalized in some way. We offer onshore resources, offshore resources. I tell people I'm labor agnostic all the time. I don't care where the labor comes from. But the other problem with this model is like entry-level US people who can't, I mean, literally people in New York, as an example, a single person has to earn $90,000 just to make ends meet in New York. San Francisco, it's somewhere close to that. So you're talking about $90K just to make it work. And you're paying SDRs, $50,000 base salaries with OTs of like 70 if they kind of figure it out. And you're wondering why these people want the hell out of those positions, right? Like, this is where globalization, for me, I was like, wow, that's an interesting thing. Like, we can start using other like countries or what have you. So you have like, you know, Central and South America, you have South Africa, you know, Whistle is in South Africa, like, you know, other organizations that I'm aware of started using this. We've been using South Africa. You know, there's a lot of these labor sources where you can get folks that are more mid-career and they don't want to move around. And, you know, $40,000 as an example there is like, you're killing it. So we kind of have this thing that's a great reckoning that we have to get to. Number one, the US-based SDR model where they stay for 6 to 12 months doesn't work anymore. So it doesn't work, just letting everybody know it doesn't work. Then the next side, and by the way, it didn't work the last 5 years. It's just that all these tech companies were promoting people because they didn't have financial metrics they needed to adhere to. They were just spending money like crazy. So now you're at a position where you can either globalize, right? Which folks like you and I and like these organizations, we really know how to do this. The other side of it is you can reformulate your demand department into something different, which is like kind of where I think all of this ought to go to. But those are the two plays. I mean, I feel like, you know, it's like anything else. Like, we're at a point now where the wind's shifted, and if you can't get on this new trajectory, it's going to be a really ugly next couple of years for you, whether you're an internal VP of sales or you're running one of these types of organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when we wanted to build and scale out the SDR program in Canada, there's a lot of government programs that would have been supportive of the labor and this and that. And we looked, but when we were trying to, you know, get hires, and I think a lot of people ran into the same problem, having an SDR that needs to make $100,000, you know, by the end of year one, or they can't afford to live in the city, is not sustainable. And to your point, you can't have an SDR. You don't get payback on an SDR if they're only there for 6 months. You need an SDR in seat for 18 months to get like a proper payback. And it's challenging to do when the cost of living goes up. And when you move farther away from like the population centers and the universities, it gets harder to find people that are technical, that have the technical skills or the desire to work remotely or online. It doesn't seem like there's been a lot of that uptick, you know, in the major population centers. If you went to university and you had to do, you know, university online, great, you get it. But they're just like, we don't get applicants, you know, from, you know, rural Iowa. And I always thought, like, you know, I think there'd be like so many opportunities for these people, you know, in outside the major population centers. But there's just there's a disconnect between what's available, what people desire to do. And so we're in Mexico. We find amazing people that are there, that are, to your point, middle of their career and have, you know, lived in the States at some point. You know, they can communicate clearly and well enough to do the job, book meetings, and they're happy. And I don't have to worry about somebody asking me to be an AE in 6 months.
Yeah, it's a huge problem that I think that we're just gonna have to figure out a good way to fix. I would like to see people who are really productive at demand gen get to start earning serious money. I have alumni of Full Funnel, and I'm really proud of the fact that a lot of the alumni who spent like 4 or 5 years with me, they're now in like director of demand gen, VP of demand gen jobs, and they're making a lot of money. What I'm trying to sort of like get is like the whole shift here where we're like, we don't have to wait until someone's like that good before they can start having good earning potential, that we got to sort of set these things up at the onset. And I think for a lot of like CFOs or CEOs that sort of listen to these things, they're always like, why is it that I can't draw a direct connection between the money that sales and marketing takes and some output? Like, there's always this gray area of bullshit that people give me. And I'm like, well, if you just tried like dividing it to demand gen, pipeline management, and customer success. Demand gen, get the horse to water. How much money do you give them versus how many disco calls do you get? Pipeline management, how utilized is that AE team? Like, how efficient are they at closing, etc.? Customer success, like, what is your retention? What's your net revenue retention? Like, most tech companies have the customer success thing dialed because retention is essentially their entire multiple strategy. Mm-hmm. The demand gen, none of them do. They just don't. Not that I've seen.
Totally. Well, and I think there's a funnel that's missing, which is there's a conflict between sales and marketing. We're sales at demand gen, where marketing says, hey, this is the right person at the right account, and they want to chat. And sales goes, yeah, but they don't want to do anything in the next 90 days. They're aware of the problem, but they don't want to buy right now. That conversation in most organizations I deal with, that prospect dies in your CRM.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's going to follow up on that. It's hard. It's a low to medium value. It's more value than following up and nurturing a cold contact, but it's less value than working an inbound lead. And it's also, there's a high volume. There's a lot of them that you need to do. It takes a lot of remembering to get all this on track. And so what happens is two things. They either live in your reps pipeline, and suddenly you have 386 deals in your AE's pipeline, and you're like, there's
terrible.
10% of these are real. Yeah. Or they lost them and they die there. And or they reject them as leads. They're like, no, it's not a good fit. And they stay on the marketing side and they die as a lead that nobody ever follows up with again.
Right.
And like, I think they're the way that we measure and organize these teams, we're missing this fourth funnel, which is this nurture category of our reps have had a conversation with them, but they're not ready to buy yet. And I think if you are working this nurture funnel appropriately, what we've seen is that at the 6-month mark of a sales development program, the nurture funnel comes online, and the nurture funnel is producing a deal every month or a deal every other month, depending on how much you're working on it. Like, I've seen it double the results of an SDR when done effectively. And so like, how do you, when you get to that, like, scale it or optimize it stage, so many companies are leaving money on the table because they're just ignoring this fourth funnel that marketing says is good, that sales says is not good. And there's this conflict that nobody wants it. So it just dies in the CRM.
So where do you think this goes in like 12 months, 24 months? Like what happens? Because I hear a lot of people pontificating online about where that SDR role is going. Like where do you think it's going?
I mean, I think what we saw in the last couple of years is, to your point, a lot of unprofitable SDR teams die because they were never profitable in the first place. They were propped up. I mean, look at KeyBank does the survey. It used to be Pacific Crest.
Yeah, it's a great survey.
I love that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
The average cost to acquire a customer was 92 cents. So companies were spending 92 cents to acquire $1 of annual recurring revenue. I think the most recent data was 2021. I don't think 2022 has come out yet. I'm not sure if KeyBank is doing it this year. But with the last I looked in 2021, it was $1.56. So companies were spending $1.56 to acquire $1 of ARR. And everybody's talking about profitable growth. If a customer is not staying for 3 years, and we know there was a lot of churn that happened in the last few years. So if a customer doesn't stay for a year and a half, or 156, whatever, you're not paying back your customer acquisition costs. That means chances are you have more cost than that. I know there's like zero cost software, but these zero cost, high gross margin software companies have a huge fixed cost of software engineers. And so in order to pay that back, customers got to stay for 3 years, best guess. So if your customer doesn't stay for 3 years, you are losing money. And this whole, optimizing for profitable growth, I think we saw a lot of companies that had these really expensive customer acquisition channel models go away. What we're seeing now is profitable SDR teams. Where I think we're going in the future is, I feel dirty even thinking this word, but I kind of like the idea. It feels gross. I don't want to say it, but growth hacking. Like, do you remember the growth hacker role? Like, the Sean Parker.
Oh, you said it. You said it.
I feel dirty.
You feel dirty now.
But in hindsight, I love the idea of there is somebody who's responsible for trying new things and operationalizing it. And it's not a salesperson. It's not a marketing person. It's somebody who understands tech, and they're going to try a whole bunch of different things. operations, because that's the kind of person you need in this role. And I don't love the word, I don't love the term. There's a lot of negative connotations that come along with it. But somebody who's technical, somebody who understands the customer, the problem space in the market, as well as the technology, and they can build out some of these text programs to get sales and marketing to work together. There's some crazy stuff that you can do that makes your SDR team super profitable, but you need to have email marketing skills and sales development skills and a little bit of AI and know the data side. And you need to have like a bare minimum of all of these things in order to sit in this position. That's a really hard position to fill, but I do think that's kind of the direction it's going to trend.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a wrap up thought for me is like, I read I think it was last summer, Tony Hughes' book, Tech Enabled or Tech Powered Sales.
Oh, Justin Michael,
yeah,
right?
Justin Michaels. Yeah. So, Tony Hughes, wrote this book, and like Justin was on there as well. And
yeah,
I read it and I was like, man, this is like the core of what he's saying was so dead on. There was all this other stuff in there that I was kind of like, but the core of it was so dead on. What like was going through my head is like, there's that like Jim Morrison clip where he's talking about like in the 60s, like what the future of music is going to be. He's like, you know, it's going to be machines and tape decks and like one person making all these sounds. And he was talking about the DJs. He was talking about computer generated music in the 60s. I felt like that book, like that's what I was thinking about when I was listening to it, which is I was like, yeah, that's exactly where this is going. And that's why like demand engineering has been going through my head, which is like the skills required to build these campaigns now. You need very technical skills. You need great planning skills. You need great mathematics skills. You need to be able to create frameworks and testing. And, you know, it's almost like, you know, the optimizedly A/B testing sophistication with like this function now. And so my hope is that demand starts becoming as its own thing, and it becomes like an engineering department for demand. And we sort of shed like an SDR or a marketing or any of this. It just becomes one team. The same way that like a submarine is a very technical thing to operate. You need a lot of people manning a lot of stations. And then your VPs of demand gen, the last 20 years, the people who have made the most money are your pipeline managers. I have this weird thing that I believe the next 20 years, it's going to be the demand gen people, the people who can manufacture this, because I think that people buy differently now. And I think that the sale is already 80% of the way there by the time they even get to those folks. So if you believe that is accurate and you don't need these like, you know, I started my career taking people to Red Sox games, doing steak dinners and playing golfing. You know, like I haven't played golf in 10 years. Like I sit in my office and just do this across all these computer screens. This is not your father's sales role. This is where we're going, feels like it's going to be an engineering role. And I'm really hoping that's what it actually becomes.
Totally agree. I mean, I do think it'll go back to a little bit of the old school sales at the same time as this hybrid of this new demand gen role. I think to your point, you got to follow the margin, right? And with a sales development team, when done right, can be your most profitable team because it scales linearly, right? If you look at your scaling your ad spend in a similar fashion, you can't scale that linearly. The more you spend on ads, the more the ads cost you, and there's competition and things like that. Whereas that's less so with sales development. And I think sales development has the greatest margin potential at companies when used right, when given the right direction, when set up correctly. And so I totally agree with you. I hadn't thought about it this way, but I 100% agree that if the sales development team is the most profitable team, then that's going to be the most sought after role. It'll be the best paid role in the company 5 years from now.
There's only one, like, if you look at every call that we take, whether it's from Fortune 500 companies or small, they always say the same thing. We need more demand. We need more demand. It's like, do you have a head of demand? No. It is like, my lawn looks like shit. It's never good. I'm like, do you have a groundskeeper? They're like, no. It's like, it's just simple, but we have to break 30 years of the way things have been and like how this works. And that's very difficult, I feel like.
100%. Well, my takeaway is if I want to understand what demand gen is going to look like in the future, I got to go back to Jim Morrison, take a bunch of psychedelics, and that's you heard it here first, Matt.
That sounds amazing. Oh, man.
Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show. This was really fun.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Collin. Really appreciate it.
Always good to see you, man.
You too.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you all next week.